So I suppose it probably gets old hearing me and my self-absorption talk about how excited I am for the next series, but I really am genuinely super excited for this next series because it's going to give me a chance to start talking from the stage about some stuff that I've been working on since the fall of 2017, in large part thanks to you all as a function of just the council's desire to make sure that we stay a learning community. One of the things they allow me to do as an alum to continue to take classes at George Fox Seminary or Portland Seminary. And so for the last, I'm in my fourth semester now of studying something called spiritual direction. Some would call it spiritual companioning. I'm calling it listening therapy. And there's really no way to talk about it or title it without it sounding really, really creepy and weird. And so that's part of the value of this series is that there's some ideas that I want to explore. And frankly, there's a posture, a disposition, a way of existing interpersonally, a way of existing spiritually that apart even from the spiritual direction kind of formality, I think there would be great value to us thinking about. If spiritual direction is something you've never heard of, that would make sense. I hadn't either. But it's maybe helpful to know that it's very populated within Christian tradition and history. Many would point to several stories in the text and point out spiritual direction happening right there. We'll talk about that throughout the series. And additionally, within Christian tradition over the last couple thousand years, if it's lost on you like it has been me, that's in large part thanks to the fact that you're a part of an evangelical tradition. And listen, I'm really grateful to have been introduced to evangelicalism at 17 or 18 years old, but one of the things evangelicalism did was that it left spiritual direction along the side of the road, really from its very, very beginning. Spiritual direction, and in a couple weeks, we're going to just do a whole message called Spiritual Direction 101, where I just kind of want to share with you what this kind of looks like in a little more concrete way. But in a place like Portland, and especially in very post-Christian, post-church kinds of cultures, part of what's going on in communities like this is spiritual directors are working very much in concert with therapists and psychotherapists, where there's referrals happening between the two of them because spiritual directors are helping people explore their spiritual selves in ways that those people aren't necessarily trusting churches to help them with. So, within the Christian tradition, it's there, especially among Catholicism. There's a strong spiritual direction tradition. Many of the mystics, of course, very popular there. Within Eastern Orthodoxy, it's a major piece of church history. Within Anglicanism, in fact, one of the observations that I think is fair to make is that among those traditions that are less sermon-heavy and more liturgical, there's a stronger value for spiritual direction because what we've learned as evangelicals is the value of the didactic, the sermon, the podcast, the book, the Bible study, all of those good things. But here's part of what we're going to explore is what if sometimes the transformation you need isn't a lack of information? And what if sometimes the transformation that would be helpful to you isn't the need for more ideas? What if sometimes it's just the need for a space where you can safely say things unguardedly and honestly, and in the process of saying them out loud, you begin to figure out where God is in your story? One of my instructors, the way she says it often is, she'll say, "Where's the heat? Where's the heat?" And her point is, if we can find the heat, then we can probably find where it is that God is interacting with you and helping, and then we can therefore help you experience or understand what it is you're experiencing and where God is within that. So candidly, one of my agendas, and as I look ahead to the next 10 years, one of my honest agendas and goals for this community and our greater community called Helena is that as best I can tell, and I went looking, you couldn't find a technical spiritual director in Helena if you wanted to. They may or may not exist. And again, some of us have had this in forms of youth leaders, and we've had this informally at different times. But I would love it if 10 years from now, spiritual directing or spiritual directors, if it was a staple of our community. If people that you work with or go to school with or whatever, who probably still wouldn't come to church with you, might trust that a friend of a friend of a friend goes to this spiritual director who might help them explore this stuff that's coming out of them. I have a friend who does chaplaincy at the VA, and the best I can tell, that's exactly what places like that are doing. Is going, you have a body, you have a mind, and you have a soul, a spirit. And to get well, we're going to attend to all three of those things. And ideally, the churches would be the safe place to do that. But spiritual direction goes, no, there's also a relational component. So maybe one way to summarize kind of part of what's going on for me is I was talking to my spiritual director this last Monday, which he lives in Bremerton, Washington. He's a retired Navy chaplain. He and I have a lot in common because he also was in the pastor flow before he was like, nah. The way he says it, he couldn't do that. So he went into chaplaincy, spent a whole 25 plus years or whatever it is in the Navy doing chaplaincy. Then when he retired, went through the same spiritual director's program that I'm doing right now. He did more even than I'll probably end up doing. We were talking on the phone this last Monday. And we were about halfway through, and he said, Adam, I feel like what I'm hearing you say is real similar to what I heard you say last time we spoke. And we talk for an hour once a month. And maybe it's perfect for my self-absorption because a major part of the function is just I talk, and he tries to help not give advice, but just kind of point out and make observations and do reflective listening. All stuff we'll talk about in a couple weeks. He said, Adam, a couple weeks, I said, what was that? And he said, well, a couple weeks ago you said, Bob, his name is Bob Marshall or Robert Marshall. He said, Adam, you said, Bob, I kind of want to turn off the microphone and just help people hear from God. Now, I don't want to turn off the mic. I'm flattered. I love being a part of this. I still believe in local church. I still believe in the sermon. In fact, I think part of what we get to explore in all of this is that spiritual direction belongs on the spectrum with other things. That again, many of you, you're really familiar with the didactic and the learning, and you like books, and you like Bible study, and you like to learn about God in those ways, and nobody's questioning the value of that. We've spent 9 years as a church together trying to raise up the value of professional therapy and psychotherapy and go, wait a minute, God's not afraid of science, even healthy brain science. Like there's a major part of the way you're wired and God gave you a mind, and so we should better embrace therapy. Nobody's questioning that. What I am trying to say, and what I mean by that statement of I want to turn off the mic, is what if there is this third way? And especially in our individualized culture, what if it's a way that's sorely missing? And that is just simply space to talk and believe that God shows up in your talking and points things out to you that you didn't see before that. Now, if the phrase, hear from God, makes you scared, I think it probably should. I've spent the last 10 years of my own Christian life, 20 years, just fearing the whole statement. I heard from God. My friend Fred says, well, then you just played the trump card. You say you heard from God, and I can't give you any more advice because I'm not going to fight with that. It probably should make us nervous because the line between a genuine experience with God and human self-delusion is razor thin, isn't it? And yet it stands out to me that same thing is true of lots of things in life, and yet we haven't just thrown the proverbial baby out with the proverbial bathwater. The same thing could be said of the internet. The line between what is good and what is toxic is razor thin. Many of you grew up in a world where if you wanted porn, you had to go looking for it. Our kids today live in a world where they have to figure out ways to avoid it. But we haven't just said no iPhones, no internet. We've said we've got to navigate that tension. Or let's talk about pharmaceuticals. Many of you could not function in life the way you are, or not as well, without the incredible science of men and women who have dedicated themselves to coming up with medications that help you live. And yet nobody needs me telling you that pharmaceuticals and some of the dark side of that has ruined many lives. So what if what spiritual direction invites us to get more in tune with is a God who is perpetually present? Like, what if God is communicating all the time? You know, one of the foundations, and this is kind of where what I really want to do is introduce you to the emotional, mental, spiritual mindset that comes with spiritual direction. And some of you, this will be uncomfortable, and some of you, it'll be wildly refreshing, and some of you will be like, I got more research to do. And that would really be the goal. But the Bible opens, contrary to some of the conversations we've had for the last 100 years where we think the Bible opens about a conversation about evolutionary biology and whether or not you can believe in God and how all that works. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we've been distracted, I'm going to argue, for a long time on what exactly that's saying. But I think it's an introductory statement to what comes next. Now, the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. What if that's real? You know, if you could read it in Hebrew, the word picture there is of a mother eagle hovering over her nest. What if God is that present to us in creation? What if he's that present to all of us? What if God is constantly communicating? There's a story in the New Testament that I think captures some of this. It involves two guys who were walking on the road to a village called Emmaus. Now, we don't know a lot about that village from archaeology, but we know it was somewhat of an obscure village somewhere in the Jerusalem metroplex. And the context here is these two guys are walking post Jesus' death and resurrection, but they don't really understand the resurrection yet. Christianity, so to speak, hasn't been born yet. There isn't this understanding that Jesus was a different kind of Messiah, bringing a different kind of kingdom just yet. And so they're distraught. And the text says, and this part is kind of disturbing to me, but we just have to name it. The text says that Jesus showed up in his resurrected body, but they were prevented from recognizing him. And that bugs me, and I don't entirely understand that, and we would have to spend some more time with that. But it also notes that they don't go, whoa, a ghost. And they don't go like, whoa, a zombie or a superhero. So something about Jesus in his resurrected body is this reminder that God's goal isn't necessarily this effervescent kind of heaven thing. It's this physical new earth, new creation thing. But nonetheless, Jesus sidles up next to them. And listen to what he says. He asks them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? Now, what transpires is a dialogue as they're walking along the road, which is why I'm an advocate for walking meetings, because I'm too nervous to stare at people for a long time. But one of my instructors, I once asked her, I said, how long can you sit in silence and stare at somebody in direction? She said, she'll be here in a few weeks. She said, 7 minutes. And I was like, good night. I think I would die before I could just sit there and stare at somebody for 7 minutes. Notice the story, though. Jesus, he comes alongside. He's walking with them. He's asked the question. They go like, have you been living in a hole? Like, what do you mean? What have we been discussing? This Messiah died. We thought he was the one. And Jesus leads them in this long, we get summarized dialogue in Luke's story about the Messiah and what exactly his life was all about. They still don't know it's him, but here's the point. What if that's not far off from our experience? Two people walking down a road, having an experience. God is right there, provoking them toward himself, and they completely miss it. What if that's not that far off from what you've already experienced today or will later today? What if this God is that present? Now, they get to where they're going, and Jesus, being the consummate gentleman, not to force himself upon anybody, says like, okay, I'm going to keep going. And they say, no, you should come to the village with us. Stay with us, for it's nearly evening. The day is almost over. So he went in to stay with them. And they sat down to eat, and it wasn't until they heard Jesus breaking bread and talking about the meal that they went, whoa, this is Jesus. What if that's not that far off? I'll bet you have experiences of this in your past. You look back on these days in elementary school or middle school or high school. You look back at these jobs you had or these relationships that you were in. You look back at these great tragedies or these great triumphs. And you didn't see it at the time, but you look back now and go like, God was there. Like, I look back now, maybe you say, and there was this moment in the dorms, and man, had I done this, not this, God was there. I look back now, and there was this job I didn't take or I did take. God was there. See, spiritual direction is actually about awakening that and getting more comfortable living in the active presence of that. There's another story where I think we could point it out. Moses and the burning bush. You may or may not know the story of Moses, who was a Hebrew himself, reared in the Egyptian high court, who at 40 years old decided that the way the Jews were treated was unjust, that he was going to do something about it. Stephen tells us in the book of Acts that he committed murder, thinking that's how he could start a revolution. That backfired, and so Moses fled. And where did he flee to? To Horeb. Why did he go to Horeb or Sinai? Because in this day, gods lived on top of mountains, and the Hebrew God lived on top of Horeb. He intentionally went somewhere. Along the way, he met some girls who were the kids of a certain priest. He married into that family, and 40 years later, at 80 years old, we have Moses shepherding sheep around this area of the Sinai Peninsula, we now are all but certain. And so there's Moses shepherding sheep, and one day, he happens upon a bush. And like something out of a Disney movie, the bush starts speaking to him, and he realizes that this is God. God gives him this picture and says he's going to lead this exodus, all this stuff that, frankly, is kind of scary. But here's the way the rabbis, they call it midrash, which is just basically a way of, the rabbis would do sermon beyond the pages of the text. And so it's like, well, maybe it's implied, it's not necessarily there, but if we just put what if in front of it, we can at least suggest it. Here's what the rabbis have asked. They've said, did Moses suddenly stumble upon a bush that was suddenly burning? Or did Moses finally notice a bush that had always been burning? Now, there's no way to know this. But maybe it's worth pointing out that you probably only take one or two routes to work, and every time you walk somewhere, you take the same route. And so they wonder, is it possible? And really, they're making the point of spiritual direction in this wondering. Is it possible that what was unique about that experience wasn't God, but it was Moses? Don't you do this in your own spiritual life? Like many of you, I'm guessing, and if not, that's okay. But you look back and you see God long before you ever saw him. And even now you look back on seasons where you go like, oh man, I didn't think about God for a week, and yet he was there. One of the Catholic streams that really celebrates this is the Benedictine tradition. Listen to this statement right from their own literature. All guests who present themselves are to be welcomed as Christ. Now, there's obviously at least a couple things going on here, right? One of them is, of course, that there's this incredible value for the dignity of people. But there's more. There's the assumption, isn't there, much like the road to Emmaus, that if someone shows up, that's not just a human thing, that's a God thing. That in our experiences, God is constantly speaking. So here's what spiritual direction does, is it just asks this question, where's God? Where was he in the events already this morning? And part of what St. Benedict's tradition does so well is that he has all these practices that really involve starting and ending your day with a reflection that invites you to go, where did I experience God today, but I walked along with him and didn't see him? Where was God in this last week, in the last month? As you think about life, where is the heat? What's the stuff that you kind of keep circling around? And is it possible that God is speaking to you there? There's a couple authors, and I tried to put a pretty robust bibliography on the mind map this week just because, frankly, I've been reading a lot of stuff in this realm. One of my favorites is a book written by a guy named Connolly and Barry. They talk about implicit versus explicit communication, and this one is really helpful to me. See, implicit communication is, maybe we could illustrate it this way. Tomorrow afternoon, you're busy, you're working, you're in class, you're not supposed to answer your phone, whatever the context is, and your phone rings. It's 1:30 in the afternoon, you look down, and you see the fateful unknown caller. And you think, this is the 21st century. Nobody answers the phone in this context. Like, it's weird to think that we used to pick a phone up off of a counter, not knowing who it was, and say hello, and just succumb to whatever it was on the other end of the line. And now we're like, that's crazy. Who would do that? So you hit silent, not the red button, because that's way too, everybody knows when that happens to them. You hit the side button and then wish that you could look at your Twitter feed quicker because you're waiting for this call to end. Now, what you don't know, and frankly, what you don't realize for quite a while because you don't listen to the voicemail for quite a while, is that at the other end of the line was a friend calling you from a landline at their office, and that friend remembered that last Thursday you had a really bad day, and they're just following up with you, not necessarily to solve your problems, but just to let you know that they're there and they think of you and they care for you. Or at the other end of the line is your wife calling or your husband calling just randomly to say hello. Or it's a friend you haven't talked to in a year who they recognize that this is the anniversary of something you experienced together, and so they're reaching out. Or it's your son or your daughter calling from school, and they're just calling to say hi, or something along those lines. See, what implicit versus explicit communication points out is this. That you didn't catch it doesn't change what's true for the communicator. They were trying to reach out. I just called to say I love you. We should have done that as a preview song. Like they were trying to form connection. They were trying to establish or reestablish or strengthen relationship. It's like walking back from lunch or walking by the main office of the school and seeing a bouquet of flowers on the counter and you assume that they're not for you. The fact that someone sent them to you is lost on you. It's implicit. It becomes explicit when you answer the phone, when you read the card, when you listen to the voicemail. See, what spiritual direction wants you to begin to think about is that He's communicating all the time. He's present. His Spirit hovers over. And maybe the issue isn't so much him as it is our picking up the phone. Barry and Connolly, they say it this way, and we're going to explore this more in a few weeks because this will also change the way you think about prayer. They say this, go to that next slide. Relationships develop when the persons involved pay attention to one another. Spiritual direction is ultimately an invitation to strengthen the skill set required to pay attention to the holy and to better understand the holy pays attention to you. And sometimes the fact that you know that he knows isn't really the point. It's that he wants to hear it from you. There's another way to say this. What if God doesn't hide? What if he's not hiding? Here's the way I've been thinking about this. Maybe this will be helpful to you. But when you leave here today and you go to drive from here to Winco or here to Steve's Cafe, whatever it is you're going to do this morning, to lunch, to home, to the office, whatever it is you're going to do, as you leave here and go there, whether that's a 2-minute drive or a 20-minute drive, or maybe even you're going to walk, just count Subarus. Now, you probably are at one already because you're going to put the key in the ignition of one, but then just count Subarus. And if you get to Walmart, if you dare, I'm a drive into the back of the lot and take the furthest spot kind of guy because I just think it's silly to drive up and down the aisles. But if you want to drive up and down in aisles, count more Subarus. Now, is anybody here thinking that they'll not see a Subaru between now and then? Of course not. But you still might be surprised, even though we all laugh, and they're good cars, but we all laugh, you're still probably going to be surprised by the sheer number, right? And you could do this with blue cars, you could do this with lots of things, Dodge trucks. But here's the question. In counting Subarus, have you actually impacted the existence of Subarus? No, you've done nothing to change the number of Subarus in Helena, Montana. What's changed? You've changed. You've become aware, consciously aware. Here's the question. What if the spiritual journey, what if it's not about Bible study and it's not about prayer and it's not about church and it's not about fasting and it's not about memorizing verses and it's not about small groups? What if it's not about any of those things? What if it's about having an awareness of God that drives us to do what? I mean, this seems to be what Jesus was so focused on. If you're doing this right, what? He would say, well, then it'll cause you to focus on trusting him and valuing people. So I'm not saying that any of those things, Bible study, church, any of those things, nobody's saying that those aren't valuable, but what if they're valuable only to the degree that they actually help you live in an awareness of God? There's a book that I wanted to bring here this week and it didn't get in. It was one of those weird Amazon Prime overpromises, which doesn't happen very often and makes the rest of us feel more human. But there's a guy named Brother Lawrence who has written a book called Practicing the Presence of God, and I highly recommend it. It's one of the best books you'll ever read. And he's a guy who was a monk who washed dishes perpetually. And it's his journal entries of how he learned to just know the presence of God in the mundane parts of life. We'll bring some with us here in a couple weeks. What if? What if he's there? And our job is awareness. There's one more verse and one more story, and then we'll sing. You know, there's a text that if you were reared in evangelicalism, and I'm grateful for mine, that is at the very center of the way we've thought. In fact, this what's called the Great Commission is frankly why we exist as a church, because we come from the DNA of people who so valued making Jesus as available as possible to as many people as possible. But this whole process has caused me to rethink what we call the Great Commission. It's found in the end of Matthew's gospel. And in Matthew's very Jewish story, it's the last thing that Jesus said before ascending into heaven. And listen to this. He says, all authority, this is Jesus speaking to the disciples, in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptize in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. Here's my question, and it's not a safe question. I hope you'll agree or disagree. That's your option. But I wonder, is Jesus saying to the disciples, I tell you what you need to do, is you need to leave the Galilee, you need to leave Jerusalem, you need to go into Samaria, you need to go into the ends of the earth. That implies the plains of North America and South America and the shores of China and Northern Europe and everywhere in between. And I tell you what you need to do. You need to go to those spaces because I'm not there. And what you need to do is you need to go to those spaces and you need to bring God with you because he's otherwise not present there. Is that an appropriate assumption of Matthew 28? Does it stand up under a Genesis 1:2 that says the Spirit of God hovered over the deep? Is the assumption when you sit across the table from somebody or you walk into your office Christian or not? Right, we do this Christian coffee shop thing and all those things. Is the assumption that you bring God to a space that he otherwise is not, is that an accurate Jesus assumption? Or is what he's saying, I tell you what you need to do, is you need to go into these spaces, and this is what we see Paul doing, especially in places like Athens. We need to go into these spaces, and we need to point out God's presence that's already there. We need to name grace everywhere we see it. Whether it's within Hinduism or it's within atheism, we just have to name the presence of God. I'm not suggesting universalism. I'm suggesting, what if the posture is to start by pointing out the presence of God, and then we bring Jesus with us? Because I don't know about you, I'm here because of the person and the life and death and resurrection of Jesus. That's why I'm standing on this stage. That we have this unique moment where God put this giant exclamation point at the end of the sentence and brought incredible clarity to the image of God that we carry around with us. It's why my bias is every Christ follower should only read from the Gospels for at least a couple years of their Christian life, and it'll mess with your Christianity. But it'll remind us that Jesus did some things that were very unique to the God conversation. He messed with the image of God that we carry in some very refreshing ways and some very disturbing ones. Is the Great Commission about taking God to a space where he doesn't already exist, or is it about pointing out a God who is everywhere and then inviting people to sharpen their understanding of this God? I don't want to do revisionist histories, but I do think it's worth thinking about how might some of the ways of our world history be different if we showed up not assuming God isn't here, but God is here. And we can point out the ways in which he is, and then we can sharpen that. What if this whole thing is about presence? We could illustrate it this way, shamelessly, around baseball. They say that this did allow me to buy a new tee, which I was very excited about. From my money, not yours, trust me. Which is, well, they say, okay, who am I going to, I just about blasted somebody last time, so you ready? That was a terrible shot on a tee, because last time I got scared, because I almost line drive this kid right in the eyeball. They say there's not a guy in the big leagues who doesn't hit off a tee every day, which is an astounding thing to think about, I think, if you spend some time with it. And I'm sure there's some exaggeration there, but you hear it often enough to go, it must be more true than not, that there's not a person in the big leagues who doesn't swing at a ball on a tee 100 times a day. Now, here's what's funny about that. Is anybody making $330 million over 13 years hitting the ball off of a tee? Just not. In fact, beyond being 5 or 6 years old, there's not a game that you can play that involves who hits the ball off the tee better than anybody else. It's in many ways, in and of itself, it's a completely useless skill once you get to about 6 years old. But, nonetheless, there's 30-year-old guys and ascending 16-year-old guys and everybody in between who, if they take the craft seriously, they're hitting off of a tee every day. Why? Well, apparently, this thing that doesn't count translates to the thing that does. That there's a correlation between the guy who hits the ball off the tee and the guy who gets a hit in the real game. There's a correlation between the guy whose baseball career is over and the guy whose baseball career continues on. What spiritual direction ultimately invites us to consider is what if we do well to adjust our thinking and recognize that the value of the coffee that Hannah's team creates and the kids' stuff that Lexi provides and the music that Kate's team leads and everything else in between all of that, the tech and the nursery, like church itself, along with your Bible study and your small group and everything else, in and of itself doesn't have value. It has value when? To the degree that it invites us to live in an awakened awareness of God's presence, which would invite us into the simple but demanding task of valuing God and valuing people. A process that maybe begins by counting Subarus or by spending 5 minutes at the end of the day just asking, God, where were you that I missed you? I'd like to pray. God, Lord, thanks that we're not a part of a new movement, but an ancient one. Thanks, God, that we stand on the shoulders of women and men who have been exploring you and what it means to walk with you in life for hundreds and thousands of years. And thanks, God, that you were faithful, that we may miss you, but you don't abandon us. God, I pray for my friends who they walk into schools and relationships and jobs and offices and places where the general assumption would be that God's not there because it's not a church. I pray, God, that you, if nothing else, would connect us with your kingdom vision, that a kingdom not connected by logos and tax statuses, but a kingdom connected by people who are transformed, who step into a space and don't bring you, but bring an awareness of you, and even a sharpened image of you. We love you, God. Amen. So we gather and scatter, and we value this and the chance to gather and wrestle with ideas and relationships, and hopefully in a way that propels you into a week of loving God, loving people more effectively. And then we like to scatter, and by that, of course, we mean that we think that our opportunity is to serve people with a towel over our arm and just meet needs, and that's really a major function of what it means to be a church together. And so we're moving towards Easter, and there's lots of things going on for Easter, but this morning we're going to talk about the Easter egg hunt on Mount Helena, right? Yep. So that's something we've done for years. It actually wasn't an idea that we had. We weren't even going to do an Easter egg hunt, and then there was a assisted living home that helped us get one started, and then that kind of happened and was fun, and it was going on its own, and so then we had this idea of moving it to Mount Helena, where we thought that would be a lot of fun and a little bit crazy, and so we get to do this egg hunt on Mount Helena, which we almost didn't do this year. In the whole process of pruning and just some of the things that we worked on this year, the same process that moved us from 3 gatherings to 2, we almost didn't do it. It's, quite frankly, the most expensive scattering thing we do all year, which is weird because it lasts 30 seconds. Yeah. But honestly, some of the really good feedback we got was from many of you and just conversations that were just like, hey, listen, there's a season of your life where having this egg hunt where you know your friends are going to be with their kids, and this event that you can invite neighbors to means a lot to you. And so that's been a fun process, and Hannah and the staff have been working really hard to add new energy to it. Like, we're hoping coffee and toys, and there's things that we're going to do to hopefully add more value to it, and yet we are hosting an egg hunt again. So Hannah's going to talk details there.
Yes, so our egg hunt will be Saturday, April 20th, again on the Mount Helena Trailhead area. So there are lots of ways to get involved the day of. If you would like, we need a few people. I should have looked at the sign-ups. Maybe 5 more people to help with setup. So that's like scattering all the eggs and then setting up. We kind of zone off different areas, so like the little kids aren't with the 4th and 5th graders. So we need help doing that. And then we'll need about 3 or 4 more greeters, and that's just welcoming people, helping them figure out which area their kiddos are in. And then we have about 10 roles for section leaders, so that's hanging out in a section and kind of helping people as needed, and then tear down. So all of those will happen again on Saturday, April 20th, and the sign-up sheets are in the lobby. To get ready for the egg hunt, we have an egg stuffing, and so if you were with us last year, that egg stuffing didn't go the best.
They're probably not with us. They probably never came to church again after that experience. It was bad. It was fun but bad all at the same time.
It was interesting. So we're doing that a little bit differently. We're giving you the opportunity to host an egg stuffing in your house. So I think we have like 2 or 3 spots left. It was really popular the previous gathering. So if you'd like to host an egg stuffing, I'm going to deliver the eggs and the candy to your house, and then you can invite your friends, neighbors, whoever over, stuff the eggs, and then bring them back. So we'll give you like 2 weeks to do that.
And
so
they're all new eggs.
Yes, they're all new eggs. No used.
That was part of what made it miserable last year.
Yeah, there's some candy, some toys, so the sign-up's in the lobby as well for that.
Yeah, so kind of a dinner for 8 with a bit of a twist. So thanks for being
stuff eggs.
Yeah, it'll be kind of fun. And I'm sure there'll be some that are empty and some that have too many, and it just depends on what what the other festivities at the egg stuffing involve, I suppose. But you can,
That's up to you, right?
you could always snack on some candy and stuff as you go. Hey, and if you came this morning intending to give, thanks for being a part of things in that way. Ushers are going to come by with buckets.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.